Good evening, everyone. We're at the final class of the second part of the course, which is kind of exciting. We're making our way through it. So that's the good news. We have a bit to cover tonight, so I think we will just get started and begin with our prayers as usual. So we'll recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha one time together. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Whoops, did it again. Okay, there we go. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chanyen gipe soknam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi Daki chanyan gipe sanam gi dola penchir sangye duparsho. All right, let's go ahead and do a short meditation. Again, just spend the first few minutes as usual, just focusing on the breath to calm the mind, focus the mind. And then I'll come in and I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight's class. So we can begin the meditation now. So now to set our motivation for this evening's class. You're in this section of the Lamrim where we're looking at the big picture, the fact that we ourselves have been going through lifetime after lifetime since beginningless time. And even last week we examined how we die, how there is the intermediate state before taking birth again. And we've done this countless times. And it will happen again at the end of this life. But we can break that cycle. We can bring this to an end for ourselves. And the other teachings we've been examining in this section are to give us the information that we need to understand that it is possible for us to be free of the causes of dukkha, this first noble truth. They are things within our own minds that are all resting upon the ignorance that sees things incorrectly, that is not knowing things as they are. And this ignorance can be removed. This is something we'll be examining much later in this course. But without a doubt, that is not something that we have to continue to experience and to be under the control of. Through the wisdom, realizing emptiness, we can attain liberation. We can know the peace of nirvana. And in setting our motivation for tonight, let's just try to bring those thoughts into our awareness. A level of renunciation, of turning away from what we've been engaged in, wanting to emerge from those patterns, and turning towards peace, nirvana, liberation, and just really wanting this for yourself. It's where it starts in terms of our eventual attainment to Buddhahood. Begins with the mind of renunciation in regard to our own situation. But we don't stop there because we see that other beings are in the same predicament as ourselves. And as we'll see when we get into the next part of this course, we can generate a mind that is as concerned about their welfare as we are currently concerned about our own, and even more so, to where we cherish other beings and want to help them and make that the main objective of our spiritual practice. And that, of course, is the mind of bodhicitta, the wish to benefit all sentient beings to the greatest degree. And then the recognition that to do that, we do have to develop ourselves. We do have to become a Buddha. But it's all rooted again in that same understanding of the situation we ourselves are in and that all sentient beings are in. In samsara, under the control of these factors we've looked at, and having the potential to be free of that, to attain liberation, and moreover, to attain complete enlightenment. So we now generate that mind that aspires to develop ourselves completely into the state of Buddhahood, so we can lead each and every sentient being, without exception, to that same state. Just rest in that mind, kind of infused with wisdom, compassion, love, kindness towards all beings. And then you can open your eyes fully and come back into the space together, and we'll start our class. So before we go too far, I did want to go ahead, and I don't want to be squeezing this into the end, but I have put out on the Google Drive the information in regard to the test. So again, if you go to the Google Drive, you'll see I've added the whole folder for test materials. I've got to just alert you to a few things. One is that I've put together the regular instructions for taking the test. And note that I've highlighted one little section there because I've added a little document. I mentioned this in regard to when I sent out the results of the first test for the first part of this course. But I just put together a little file with some very gentle advice around how to prepare to take the test, because there were some folks that maybe I thought could use some additional encouragement and some things that they might find useful in studying for it. I also want to mention that underlined section that's about in the middle of the screen there. Please note that due to the larger portion of material covered in the second part of the course, there are a total of 16 questions to study as compared to 14 for the previous one. So you get 2 extra questions to enhance your learning. It's the way you should look at it, not 2 more things to have to deal with. And then, of course, that means that we're going to have a few more that we answer on the test as well. So instead of 7 questions, you'll be answering 9 questions. I've elaborated it a bit. We have 2-point, 3-point, 4-point, and 5-point questions. And so again, you only have to answer 1 of the 5-point, 3 of the 4-point, 3 of the 3-point, 2 of the 2-point. So it's a total of 9 questions. And again, it's a very similar format to last time. I did want to mention that please don't answer more than the required number, because that puts me in the predicament of like, what do I do? And so I didn't inform everyone the last time, but this is how I will handle that. If you do, answer 4 instead of 3, well, then the latter answers will be excluded. I'll just work with the first 3 that you give me. So you might do better on the latter one, but that's just the way I have to kind of deal with it, because I really do want people just to answer the number of questions that are required. And you choose which ones that you want to answer within that section, as you've done in the previous test. So it's, anyway, hopefully that will give you some guidelines there. This is the document. It's just a few little points about how to, some suggestions on how to study for the test. And I don't know that I need to say much more. Please read it through on your own, and you'll have an opportunity to, work with that outside of here. I did, as usual, put together the list of homework questions to study with the answers and without the answers. So the one without the answers is one if you want to print it up and just work from that. But I would really encourage you, and that's some of the advice I'm giving you, is to really look through the answers. Maybe go through and highlight some of the main points for yourself. I didn't put that in the suggestions for studying, but I think that's a wonderful way to do it, just to kind of get an idea of what is all covered within these. So again, the answers are all there. There's no surprises in that regard. And you should have something that is kind of for each of these. But again, in your own words. You don't have to memorize 9 pages of, homework answers. And again, you have the honor statement and the actual test, which is marked very clearly, do not open until you're ready to actually take the test. So that's everything. I don't know that I need to go through any more on that, because people went through it the last time. If there are folks who didn't take the previous test, you're welcome to take this one. Again, it is a part of the basic program if you're going to do certification to have the test completed. And as I mentioned, when I sent out the first test results, the entirety of the course will be 1 grade, or so essentially, and I'm not grading it like A, B, C, D. You'll get a pass or fail. Everything over 70% is a pass, everything under 70% would be a fail. And so each test adds more points to the total that you have. It'll be 100 points, I think, in total, because the first one was 20, this one's 30, the next one will be 20, because it's a little bit shorter. And then the final one will be 30, because that's the longer part of the text on shamatha and special insight. So essentially, just know that it'll be a total of 100 points. So whatever points you have now have been accumulated towards that 100 points. So I think everyone can certainly obtain a passing grade. So if you have any questions, again, contact me outside of class. I think it's best, rather than getting into questions about that right now. The second thing I want to cover before we get into new material is the whole thing about the bardo, which came up. Where did I put that now? I actually went to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is good on some things, and was this is kind of giving a background about the teachings on the bardo. I had mentioned last week I thought a lot of it came from the tantric teachings, and there are some elements that do come from tantra in terms of specifically what states of mind are arising, because in the death process in tantra there are very different levels of mind that are taught. And yet at the same time, and it should have come to me last week, I don't know why it didn't, we did study the bardo in Vasubandhu's text, so that's based on sutra. So there, you can read this, go to Wikipedia and look at it. It's quite interesting. Apparently there are some schools of Buddhism that do not kind of adhere to the idea of an intermediate state. It does seem like the intermediate state to some degree was taught even in the Vedic traditions. So this is the one sutra that is mentioned that talks about kind of the teaching to the Venerable Nanda on entry into the womb. And it does touch, I think, a little bit on the intermediate state. It's mostly about the birth process. But that comes from this little book, very thin book called Death, Intermediate State, and Rebirth in Tibetan Buddhism, where I found that that sutra was referred to in here, even in the section on the intermediate state. This talks about, from a tantric perspective, what is all going on there. So just know I stand corrected that I didn't come to me last week that there were sutra references to the bardo, to the intermediate state. But Tibetan Buddhism and Tantric Buddhism in particular have taken it again to another level in terms of their investigation of what's happening at a subtler degree with the mind. And also this breaking out things into the 6 bardos, which is not taught that much in the Geluk tradition, but you see it in the Nyingma tradition and perhaps the others, I don't know for sure, but different ways of referring to kind of periods of time that you could call bardos, states that exist kind of between various occasions, what have you. So you're welcome again to do your own research on that, but the intermediate state is an interesting topic, and it will be taught whenever we get to that part of the basic program where we cover these 3 supplementary texts, the one of which is on this that I just held up a short while ago, Death, Intermediate State, and Rebirth in Tibetan Buddhism. So let's get back to the text. We are in the last part of this, where we're looking at this chapter that has to do with developing the mind of renunciation and kind of the striving for liberation that was talked about at the beginning of this part. Again, in the second part of the Lamrim, essentially, the middle capable being, the person of middling capacity. And so here, I want to mention before we get into this section that in the Lamrim Chenmo, and I've got a little footnote there, Lama Tsongkhapa covers the topic of the 12 links or factors of dependent arising, which many of you have heard of. It's a wonderful teaching, very intricate teaching, but is very useful to study kind of the process by which we take rebirth. He covers that in this, just before this section. So we had gone through kind of the presentation that's based on the 4 Noble Truths, and now the Tsongkhapa and the Lamrim Chenmo kind of puts in this additional teaching on the 12 links of dependent arising. If you're curious about that, I've given the page citations. You can find them. They're separate chapters in the Great Treatise, Volume 1, the Lamrim Chenmo. I don't remember the chapter number. In the hard copy, it's pages 315 to 325. And then Geshe Sopa, in his Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, Volume 2, gives a very detailed and wonderful description of the 12 links. It's a very complex teaching, like I said. It's not something that's that easy to kind of get your head around, but it's a wonderful way to understand, again, the process by which, based on the root of ignorance, we go on to create actions. Those actions are imprinted on the mind. They give rise to another existence, and so on. And it kind of fills in a lot of the information about how we take rebirth and the factors that are involved in creating that process. And of course, the goal is to end that process, and to end it primarily by eliminating the root, the first link, which is the link of ignorance. So it's a really wonderful set of teachings, but since it's not taught in the middle-length Lamrim, I'm not going to cover it as part of this course. I have taught it here and there. I don't know, you can find other teachings out there as well. There's also a book by His Holiness called The Wheel of Life, a very short book that's quite useful as well. Let's get into the rest of the text then, and we're in this section that's called The Measure of Its Development. What's the its? The it is renunciation. What is the measure of having developed this mind? So Lama Tsongkhapa says, when you have come to understand the characteristics of cyclic existence in detail from the point of view of sufferings and their origins, the desire to eliminate them and the desire to attain their complete pacification arises. So once we've studied that first part of what we looked at in this course, then you develop the wish to be free of all of that. You say, okay, if this is what I've been engaged in, been experiencing all these various types of suffering, the 8, the 6, the 3, and I've been going from life to life under the control of my karma and delusions and so on, I want to be free from this. While this is indeed the attitude of renunciation, Tsongkhapa says, it is not sufficient by itself. Therefore, you should generate that mind to the same extent as the mind that does not wish to be stuck in a house ablaze with fire, or stay locked up in a prison, and to the same extent that it desires liberation from them. It will then still be necessary to increase it. So I mentioned this in the motivation tonight, that this really is the initial realization that helps you to achieve Buddhahood. In fact, we call in the text that we studied in the master's program, the very first one, the ornament for clear realization. A clear realization is a mind that is conjoined with the thought of renunciation, meaning that that's the starting point. Everything else is built upon it. It includes bodhicitta and the wisdom of emptiness and so on. But it starts with being conjoined with renunciation. Because renunciation, as we're going to see in the text, even for the bodhisattva, is a very important milestone in terms of seeing their own situation clearly. Then they can see the situation that other beings are in and not just want their own liberation from this process, but want all sentient beings to be separated from it. And that's what we're going to go into again in the next part, where we look at the teachings of the Mahayana that are in the third level of the stages of the path. But we're already going to touch on that a little bit here by understanding in Tsongkhapa's presentation why the bodhisattva, the Mahayanist, really needs to generate renunciation at a deep level. As was just said, in that previous paragraph, though that's talking about anybody, either those on the individual liberation path, the Hinayana, or those on the path to Buddhahood, the Mahayana, either of them will need to develop that mind to that degree. So in the middle of the screen there, as Sharawa taught, if this attitude is no more than mediocre, like flour that's thrown into sour milk, he means kind of like floating on the top. It doesn't generate kind of a depth to it, doesn't go into it and become one with the milk. The view that rejects the causes of cyclic existence, the origins, will also not become more than that. So again, just like if it's really mediocre, just floating on the surface, then you can't really develop the depth of mind that wishes to be free from this state of existence, free from samsara, and attain the peace of nirvana. Accordingly, one striving for liberation, the cessation that is the ceasing of sufferings and origins, will be the same, right? You won't really, strive for rejecting the causes of it. You won't then have the mind that seeks all of that. It's just, understandable that if you don't have it at that depth, you're not going to have the impulse, the force to move you in that direction. Because of that, the desire to accomplish the path of liberation will be mere words. And also, there will be no basis then for the compassion that cannot bear the suffering of other beings who wander in cyclic existence. So he's essentially uniting it then with the Mahayanist, which is essentially saying that if you don't generate this strong wish and understanding for yourself and this desire to be free of it, you can't ever generate the compassion that wants that liberation and freedom for all sentient beings, that is compassionately motivated to have that wish. Since unsurpassed, uncontrived bodhicitta, he says, which has the power to arouse the mind, will not arise, you become a Mahayanist only in the way your understanding follows from words. We would say, in name only, right? You're only a Mahayanist in name only, because you're only understanding the meaning of it, but you haven't yet generated the mind that supports you being a Mahayanist. For that reason, you should cultivate that attitude again and again. So this is actually part of the homework for tonight, is that first part of this, where we look at what is the measure of achieving that mind, and why is it important for bodhisattvas to have that mind? Because again, without that mind, it's impossible for them to go on to generate the wish for all beings to be free from suffering. There's a wonderful line from a verse from Master Shantideva, where he says, how can those who have never wished this for themselves possibly wish for others to have it? And it's kind of true, right? If you haven't yet generated the wish for you yourself to be free from samsara, how can you want that for others? You have to see it in regard to your own situation. And you have to then be able to say, yes, this is unbearable that I am continuing to be in this state. But it's even more unbearable that countless other beings especially those beings who have been my dear, kind mother, all the wonderful things we're going to look at in the next part of this course, when I see them through that lens and understand the incredible kindness I've received from them, I have to be dedicated to their welfare. How can I divorce my own welfare from theirs? They use the analogy frequently of like leaving a burning building while your whole family is burning inside, right? This would be horrible, right? To leave behind all the beings who have been very dear and close to you to save yourself. If you exit samsara and you achieve your own internal peace, well, wonderful for you, but everyone else is still burning in samsara, right? That's why even that analogy that was used around the strength of your mind of renunciation is the wish to like leave a burning building immediately. That's the sort of power we want to have behind this mind of renunciation. But then bodhicitta is the wish to get everyone else out of the house before we even exit the house, because we are equally concerned or moreover concerned about their welfare. So this is what we're going to be moving into in the next section, the really I consider the juicy part of the Lamrim, though all of it has, its relevance, obviously. So now we get into eliminating some misconceptions that might be in our minds around this. Tsongkhapa says, you may think it is explained in the sutra teaching the Tathagata's inconceivable secret that if you cultivate extreme revulsion and disenchantment with cyclic existence, you will fall into the extreme of peace, like the Shravakas, the hearers, because of your disgust for re-entering cyclic existence. Therefore, it is excellent for Hinayanas, but unreasonable for bodhisattvas to cultivate disenchantment. So this is this idea that, if we look at those who are on the Hinayana path, which are not just the Shravakas, the hearers, but also what are called the Pratyeka Buddhas, which are the solitary realizers, they are aiming for their own liberation, a very noble goal, but obviously not the final goal, not the ultimate goal that we all can achieve through having Buddha nature. And that is the goal that we all will eventually attain, is our own enlightenment. But they need a more intermediate stop. Sometimes they even use this analogy. This is in Chandrakirti's text, the Madhyamakavattara, where you kind of you want to get people to go from point A to point C, right? Which is, this is the final place you want them to be, but they're starting here. Well, many people don't have the stamina to go right from A to C. They need B in the middle, an islander of some sort to refresh themselves and to kind of attain some level of accomplishment before they go on to the final destination. And there are many people who have that predisposition. Most of us gathered here, I imagine, because of our kind of closeness and fondness for the Mahayana path as it's taught in Tibetan Buddhism, are probably not in that category. But there are many beings who need that, because that's the load they can carry. That's the burden they're able to bear. So the idea here is what Tsongkhapa is saying, is that you might think, well, then it's really good for those people who need to get to this intermediate destination to go from A to B to develop renunciation, because that's the mind that will get them to that intermediate sort of state of liberation, what's called here a sort of solitary peace. They say that once they attain that state, they exit from samsara, they don't take rebirth again, and they abide in a state of peace, kind of in a mental body in a lotus somewhere. And then over, who knows, countless eons, eventually a Buddha is able to stir them out of that solitary peace and beckon them back into the path, into the Mahayana, to go the destination now from B to C. Well, if you have an inclination towards getting to C right from the beginning, well, then you're best to invest all your time in going from A to C, because the amount of time that you would spend is going to be less than the person who goes from A to B, takes a nice long siesta there, and then goes from B to C in the end. And that's why, again, those who have a predisposition for this path of the Bodhisattva are advised to see it all the way through, to really follow the path. So again, this person who's raising this objection says, well, it seems like it would be an appropriate mind for those who want to go to B, but I want to go to C. Therefore, shouldn't I be putting all my attention into bodhicitta and all the bodhisattva practices? Do I really need to have the mind of renunciation? Is the essential question that's being raised here. So Tsongkhapa says, the meaning of the statement, thus a bodhisattva should not be terrified by cyclic existence, which is how it's sometimes phrased for bodhisattvas, how we have that courage to be able to endure cyclic existence and don't really generate a wish to part and go to solitary peace, It's not to point out that the bodhisattva should not be repulsed by the sufferings of birth, aging, illness, death, and so on, of wandering in existence under the power of karma and the mental afflictions. Rather, it is that owing to their bodhicitta, they should not be afraid of taking rebirth in existence for the benefit of sentient beings under the power of their aspirational prayers and compassion. They say that bodhisattvas at a certain level are able to steer their rebirths because they're taking rebirth through their compassion. And they might need to endure various sufferings of samsara in order to continue on their path of learning. But the idea is that they still generate an equal distaste, a disenchantment, a disillusionment with samsara. They see that, but they are willing to courageously kind of accept that fact that they're going to continue to go back into samsara again and again and again in order to cultivate their minds all the way to Buddhahood. Now, there is this kind of ideal, bodhisattva ideal, that is sometimes thrown out there, that bodhisattvas kind of do that, and that's kind of an okay place to be, just continue to hang out in samsara. And you're going to see that contested and refuted later. The idea is that certainly you need to continue to be in samsara to develop your mind all the way to Buddhahood. That's the only way you're going to be able to do it, is being amongst sentient beings and practicing the path. But you will, again, have this dedication to becoming enlightened for their sake. You don't just hang out aimlessly in samsara. That's not what happens. We're going to read a little bit of Geshe Sopa's commentary on this section after I finish going through it myself. So again, he says there, it's the bodhisattva should not be afraid of taking rebirth in existence in order to benefit sentient beings. Under the power of their own prayers and compassion, they do this. They continue to go from lifetime to benefit beings and develop their minds all the way to Buddhahood. Tsongkhapa then says, in fact, as we wander in existence under the power of karma and the mental afflictions, we are oppressed by many sufferings and cannot even bring about our own welfare, let alone anyone else's. Since that is the door to all degeneration, we need to block it. We must develop extreme disenchantment, which is a key word for renunciation, kind of that disenchantment with samsara, a wish to emerge from all of that, even more than the Hinayanas, he says, and enjoy taking rebirth in existence under the power of aspirational prayers and compassion. So he's kind of pointing out this difference, and Geshe Sopa is going to go into this, the difference between bodhisattvas who continue to take rebirth again and again through the power of their compassion and prayers, versus those who are beings that are under the control of their karma and delusions. Because especially once you get to a certain level of development on the bodhisattva path, which is essentially the path of seeing, when you cross over, having had your direct realization of emptiness, that you are then able to free yourself from the power of karma to take rebirth and so on. You then start taking rebirth again and again and again through the force of your compassion for beings. Because you see that that's what you have to do in order to achieve enlightenment. Again, you don't just cross over and then immediately become a Buddha. You have to continue to purify the mind and to develop all the qualities that you need, which are developed while you're on the learning path, associating with beings, being generous to them, kind to them, patient with them, and so on. So, in accordance with that, the same sutra also says, bodhisattvas, having taken care of ripening sentient beings, view cyclic existence to be beneficial, unlike the great passage to peace. Again, when they see what the Hinayanas are doing in exiting samsara, leaving the burning house, and kind of having a peaceful state, never to be in the burning house again, that's, again, good for them with their minds that maybe are limited in the burden they can bear. But for bodhisattvas who have great compassion for everyone in the burning house, that's not where they want to be. They don't want to be in peace. They want to continue to be in cyclic existence because it's a beneficial place for them to cultivate the courageous compassion they need to continue on the path to Buddhahood. It is set forth in Bodhisattva levels, this is a Sangha's text, that if someone with Bodhisattva vows expresses themselves in the above manner and fail to differentiate these two different ways of cycling in samsara, that bodhisattva commits an afflicted misdeed, or that person with the vows, let's put it that way, because you can have the vows before being a bodhisattva. Then it goes on to say the intention of 400 stanzas, Aryadeva's text, clearly set forth by the great Master Chandrakirti in his commentary on that text, is to see those sentient beings as one's relatives, again, as one's dear mother, father, and so on, and thus generate bodhicitta after developing revulsion for cyclic existence. So this is the process. It's set out by Aryadeva, it's set out by so many other beings, that you have to generate revulsion for disenchantment with samsara and renunciation, and then you generate bodhicitta on top of that, and that's what keeps you going from life to life, involved in samsara until you become a Buddha. So again, I'm going to read a little bit from Geshe Sopa's commentary on that section, and also know that in that last bit, Chandrakirti's commentary on the 400 stanzas, you can find that in the Lamrim Chenmo in this section. In the hard copy, it's pages 330 and 331, and the commentary from Geshe Sopa's on 368 and 369 in his steps. I'm not going to go through those because I think it's almost too much information, but know that, again, that's a wonderful Mahayana text. I've never studied it in its entirety, the 400 stanzas, but you see passages from it cited in many other Mahayana texts and treatises and what have you. So let's go to the slides that I put together from Geshe Sopa's commentary on this section, and we'll see what he says. He says, "When you are forced to wander helplessly in cyclic existence, constantly assaulted by innumerable types of suffering, completely under the power of karma and afflictions, you cannot even do anything to help yourself." Tsongkhapa said something similar, right? So how could you possibly do anything that would benefit others? If we're still kind of bound up in samsara, if we haven't developed a mind that wishes to be free of our own situation, we also are limiting ourselves in what we can do for others, because we're totally under the control of our crazy minds, right? He goes on to say then, this helpless entrapment is the door through which all the troubles of all beings arrive. Seeing this, the bodhisattva should actually develop a far more intense feeling of disenchantment towards cyclic existence than even a Hinayana practitioner does, and should resolve to bring an end to these conditions. Right, so this is again in regard to ourselves initially. We should see very clearly what we are engaged in, the reality of especially the first two noble truths, the true dukkha or suffering we experience, and the true origins of that within our own minds. Then we have a strong wish to be free of that ourselves, and we can work tirelessly, not just for ourselves, but for countless other beings. Bodhisattvas take rebirth in cyclic existence by the special, it's weird, there must be an extra word in the text because I copied it from the text through Kindle, but anyway, they take rebirth in cyclic existence by the special power of their compassion and the willed direction of their aspirational prayer. They take rebirth with the express purpose of helping those who are still cycling through suffering states without any control. This is what a bodhisattva is driven by. When you become a kind of card-carrying bodhisattva, you have a mind of uncontrived, spontaneous renunciation. I'm sorry, bodhicitta. You have renunciation prior to that, but you have bodhicitta. You have the wish to benefit all beings by becoming a Buddha that is motivating your actions because it's there spontaneously. You don't have to use the techniques we're going to study in the next section to develop it. You already have it within your mind. He then goes on to say there's a big difference then between entering samsara in this way, through the power of compassion and prayer, and wandering helplessly under the control of karma and afflictions. Bodhisattvas are choosing to take rebirth in order to benefit others, and it is that opportunity to assist beings who are trapped in samsara that they enjoy. That is what it means when the sutra says that they enjoy being born in cyclic existence. It's not that like they take delight in just hanging out there and thinking there's nothing really to it. They've got their eyes wide open in regard to what samsara is, and they know it for what it is. But they enjoy taking rebirth through the power of their compassion to benefit other beings. It goes on to say then, let's see, get to the next screen. Bodhisattvas see all too clearly the sufferings of samsara, and they abhor what they see. But they have nothing to fear in taking rebirth because they are doing so with an altruistic purpose. It is important to understand this distinction, right? Those beings who are just wandering from life to life under the control of their karma and delusions, and bodhisattvas who are taking rebirth again and again and again through the power of their compassion to benefit countless beings. If you have taken, and then this last little bit that pertains to the bodhisattva vows in particular, where you may have, some transgression against your vows, if you hold this incorrect view. If you have taken the bodhisattva vows but fail to make this distinction, and you hold the position that bodhisattvas should not see cyclic existence as a suffering condition, and should not cultivate the thought of renunciation, then you are committing an infraction of the bodhisattva vows. So what I've done is I put together, this is number 14, the 14th branch vow. It's not as powerful in terms of breaking it compared to the root transgressions that you have in the bodhisattva vows. But again, it is an important one. Branch vows are very powerful, and they are also extreme negativities if we engage in breaking them, transgressing them. So this is how it's set out in the FPMT publication, the Bodhisattva Vows, and I'll probably give you that publication as part of the next course, part 3, where we look at when you take the Bodhisattva vows and what have you, so you can use that as a study tool. But this is what it says for that particular branch vow, secondary vow. Wrongly thinking that as Bodhisattvas remain in samsara for 3 countless great eons, which is the amount of time it's said to accumulate the merit that you need to become a Buddha, according to the Sutra Path, which is not so in Tantra, by the way, it's much shorter than that. But know that this is the courage we have to have, is the ability to stay in samsara for as long as it takes to become a Buddha, and are not afraid of delusions. Therefore, it's not necessary to try to abandon delusions and achieve nirvana. This is incorrect thinking, the commentary, this brief commentary on this branch vow says. Bodhisattvas come to this world to benefit sentient beings, but they have an even greater renunciation of samsara and a wish for nirvana than Hinayana practitioners. However, through their great compassion, they will happily take birth in the naraks, that's the Tibetan term for the hell realms, if this would benefit just one sentient being. We often say that I would, take rebirth in the hell realms for the sake of one sentient being. It's just one being who will benefit from that extreme pain and suffering that one would have to endure being reborn in the hell realms for the benefit of them. You would happily do it. It is mistaken to not cultivate the opponents to the delusions and try to achieve nirvana, and also a mistake to dissuade others from trying to attain nirvana because of the above wrong view. It's essentially just telling us that this is a wrong view that you would have if you think that it's just bodhisattvas just hang out in samsara and they don't really have any concern about removing their own delusions or achieving any sort of liberation themselves. They want that for themselves very deeply, but that is not their main goal. Their main goal is to achieve enlightenment, and so therefore they will continue to go from lifetime to lifetime through the force of their great compassion to achieve all the various demarcations and progress on the bodhisattva path all the way to enlightenment, as long as it takes. Again, in the sutra path, it's the amount of merit you would need to accumulate over 3 great countless eons, which is an incredibly long time. I think one great countless eon is something like 10 to the 59th years or something. I don't know, it's quite long. So can't even imagine 10 to the 59th. I mean, that's like a lot of zeros. So anyway, the point is that that's the level of courage and conviction bodhisattvas have. So it's not that they don't have renunciation, it's that they have this mind of compassion that is built on top of that. And bodhicitta, of course, the mind that spurs them on to go from life to life with their aim, their goal, kind of very clearly in their mind. So now we come to kind of the path. What is the nature of the path? Recall that in the Four Noble Truths, we kind of talked about them very briefly. We looked at the first 2 in more detail, the truth of dukkha or suffering, the truth of the origin of dukkha. And then we can certainly understand that there's an ability to attain a cessation of dukkha and its causes, which is the 3rd noble truth. The 4th noble truth in terms of the path, there's many ways that the path is laid out, but here we're going to look at the presentation that is in the Lamrim, which kind of brings them into 3 main trainings, 3 main practices. So now we have a little introduction to this section through meditation on the faults of existence, as explained above, an intense desire to renounce cyclic existence, and owing to that, the need to avert cyclic existence arise. Therefore, 2 points are made in this regard: the kind of life through which cyclic existence is averted, and the kind of path to cultivate to avert it. So what Tsongkhapa is going to talk about is he's going to say, well, okay, so there is this way of attaining this cessation. This is the path. What do you need as a basis in order to accomplish that? Because it's not on any basis in samsara. Obviously, again, in an animal realm, you'd have a hard time doing it. Even in the God realms, you have a hard time doing it because of the kind of sedation that you occur under the great pleasures of the God realms that can be very difficult to even generate renunciation. Much less bodhicitta and all the things that would follow from that. So what do you need in order to achieve this mind that we've been talking about? The mind that is intent upon being free from samsara and achieving, liberation. So Tsongkhapa goes on in the next part to talk about the kind of life through which cyclic existence is averted by quoting Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. It states, now that you have obtained a birth of freedom, remember this birth of freedom and endowments that we looked at in part 1, which we've made reference to occasionally, beyond the so-called defective 8 unfree states, recall those 8 states that we are no longer experiencing at this moment in this life. We're not in the animal realm, hell realm, hungry ghost realm, and so on. Even in the human realm, we're free of a lot of difficulties. So now that we have this with these 8 freedoms, and even, of course, the 10 endowments that we spoke of in that section, make an effort to avert rebirth. Make an effort into generating renunciation and using this basis of this human life to do that. So as is set forth here, you need to avert cyclic existence at this time when you have the freedoms and endowments. For it has already been explained that in the unfree states, there's no opportunity to avert it. If we are in the state of an animal, a hell being, a hungry ghost, even on one of these long life gods that experience the great pleasures and blissful states there, you are not going to be able to use that mind to do this work. Naljorpa Chenpo Jangchop Rinchen said, now is the time to distinguish ourselves from cattle. We're not animals. We don't have animal lives. Let's be better than that. Let's actually be human beings that know we have a precious existence and use it well. Potowa also said, since it has not yet stopped by itself while we were roaming about so long, it will also not now stop by itself. So previously we haven't stopped samsara by just going from life to life, right? We're still in it. This is still happening to me. And, it's not going to stop on its own then by itself. Therefore, he says, we must avert it. However, the time to avert it is now that we have obtained the freedoms and endowments. This is why we call this, the perfect human rebirth. It's a precious opportunity to actually cultivate, first of all, what we saw in the first level of the stages of the path, the karma that we need to generate good rebirths, but then this more important goal, to achieve freedom for ourselves from the cycle of existence. So then he continues, even more than that, lay people have many obstacles to accomplishing the Dharma and have the disadvantage of numerous faults. Since those who are ordained avert them to some degree, true, right? Those who take ordination are setting themselves in a lifestyle and a way of existing that they'll have greater focus on the Dharma in that life. The ordained then have the best life for averting cyclic existence. That is why the wise should delight in ordination. So again, we're getting into that understanding that having the vows of what are called individual liberation or pratimoksha, particularly those that pertain to ordination, though you can take the lay vows, that are the 5 basic vows that are held by the monastics, though the one around sexual behavior is held at the level of no sexual behavior for monastics, whereas for those who take the vow as a lay person, it's no adultery, that type of unwise sexual behavior. But essentially, you can take the lay vows, and that's a wonderful place to be. At least live this life with the 5 lay vows if you can. But if you can take the vows of ordination as a monk or a nun, you have a greater basis, a greater support for engaging in a life that can be very meaningful. Now, this is in a very traditional way. I mean, we look at ordination in the West, and maybe it's not as opportunistic as what we might want it to be, right? Because many people who get ordained in the West end up living lives where they're still working and doing other things and maybe not doing the retreat time that they ideally should be and focusing on study and what have you. But the monasteries and nunneries where they do study and have that type of support, that you can definitely make your life more meaningful in terms of really dedicating yourself to achieving these realizations. You can do that as a lay person too. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there are more obstacles, especially if you have a family and you have a job and commitments that you have there and all the stuff that happens that end up using a good portion of this life and the time in this life, so that you then have very little time for spiritual practice. But as you can see, I mean, everyone gathered here, everyone in the room here, myself, none of us are ordained, right? I mean, it takes some level of commitment to even take on ordination. And it's a very personal choice, and people may have their own reasons for doing that or not doing that. But just know that it is an ideal basis when it is practiced and you have the opportunity to take advantage of it in the way that Tsongkhapa is describing here. So, the Questions of Householder Ugra Sutra says that lay bodhisattvas should aspire to ordination. This mainly refers to aspiring to full ordination, because there are novice ordinations as well where you have some of the vows, but full ordination is where you hold the entire set of the vows that the Buddha gave to monks and nuns again, 2,500, 2,600 years ago. Ornament for the Mahayana Sutras also says, those on the side of the ordained have limitless excellent qualities. Thus, those exerting themselves in vows excel over householder bodhisattvas, right? So you, by virtue of the number of vows that you're holding and the quality of your life holding them in that lifestyle, you can generally excel over a householder bodhisattva who is not holding that degree of vows and so on. Thus, ordination is not only praised for the attainment of the complete release, that is, liberation from cyclic existence, but is also presented as the best basis for the accomplishment of omniscience, Buddhahood, by way of both the perfections, which is what we're studying in the Lamrim, and then, of course, mantra, tantric teachings in the Vajrayana, where being an ordained person, man or woman, is an ideal basis for both of those. So again, know that ordination plays its role throughout all levels of the stages of the path. Among the three vows, meaning the vows of individual liberation, pratimoksha, the bodhisattva vows, and the tantric vows, the vows of ordination are those of pratimoksha, individual liberation. That is why you should respect the pratimoksha vows as the root of the teachings. And my little footnote there is to remind me to go to the slide where there is the same thing said, the pratimoksha vows being the root of the teachings by Tsongkhapa. In the very short Lamrim text, the foundation of all good qualities, it's only 14 verses, and it covers the entire Lamrim in essence. It says, through my being led by this pure thought of renunciation, with great remembrance, alertness, and conscientiousness, please bless me to make keeping the individual liberation vows, the pratimoksha vows, the root of the teachings, my essential practice. So there is this kind of misunderstanding that some people may have that they think once more, just like renunciation, they might think is not a mind that a bodhisattva needs to work on because we're working on bodhicitta and all this more important stuff. Well, you might think, well, too, the lay vows and the pratimoksha vows, all those kind of in that lower category are not so essential because I'm aiming for the bodhisattva vows and the tantric vows, but they are the root of the teachings. They are really the foundation of the Buddha's whole philosophy around this concept of ahimsa, non-harmfulness. Non-harmfulness to ourselves, non-harmfulness to others, even to some degree non-harmfulness to the environment. But this is, again, what the Buddha set up in these vows, that is the root, the basis of all the teachings. Now we go on to the next section. What's the kind of path to cultivate to avert cyclic existence? So what is it that the bodhisattva or any being practices if they are going to avert cyclic existence, if they're going to actually be free of that? Again, from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, he says, even if your head or clothes caught fire, give up fighting it. Simply make an effort to destroy the occurrence of future rebirths. There is no purpose better than that. He's kind of saying, even if you had something really horrible happening to you, don't lose your practice. Keep your practice, even if your hair catches on fire. Which sounds pretty outrageous. Like you wouldn't burn your hair, or you wouldn't put out your hair while your hair is burning, and you just stay doing your practice. But anyway, it says here, through pure ethics, this is the first of the three precious trainings, as they're called, wisdom, which is usually set out as the third, and concentration, which is usually the second, attain nirvana, the peaceful, immaculate, tamed state, which is ageless, deathless, and limitless, Once you attain that state, there's no degeneration from that. Remember, that's the first of the two states that are definite goodness, meaning it is certain or definite that you will continue to experience that goodness for eternity. You'll be free from earth, fire, water, wind, sun, and moon. You're free from all the conditioned existence that, we have to experience being under the control of our karma and delusions. So Tsongkhapa then says, train in the three types of precious trainings of the path as set forth in this statement. So again, I'm going to talk about them very, very briefly because we don't have tons of time. But know that these three are really the essential teachings of the Buddha, and in fact, they mirror what are called the three baskets of the teachings of the Buddha. The very first one, the foundational teachings, are the teachings in ethical conduct, ethics. Ethics is really the basis, the foundation for all of our practice. That's why karma and avoiding the 10 non-virtues, engaging in the virtuous actions, is taught at the very beginning, because we need that foundation of good morality as a basis. The morality that is taught by the Buddha in the most extensive way is in the basket of what is called Vinaya. Then in the second one, the second training is the training in concentration. By concentration, we're essentially referring to making the mind undistracted and having the potential, the ability to use the mind, make it very, very serviceable, which is the essence of the mind of calm abiding, or shamatha. Shamatha we are going to study in part 4 in detail. Part 4 includes the teachings on shamatha, and it includes the teachings on developing the third higher training. But anyway, this going back to these three, we got the ethics that are taught in the Vinaya, then we have concentration that is taught in what is called the sutra basket. Sutra basket is doesn't mean all the sutras, it means the sutras in particular that are included in there that help us to engage in deeper meditative concentration, meditative stabilization. Remember, calm abiding I've referred to earlier, because on the basis of that, you can go on to achieve the 4 concentrations, the 4 formless absorptions, and so on. Those are deeper levels of meditative stabilization that are taught by the Buddha. But essentially, these two are the setup then for the third one. The third training, the highest training, is the training in wisdom, which again we'll see in the fourth part, where we look at how to achieve vipassana, or special insight, which is particularly the insight into emptiness, into the nature of reality. That is essential for developing the realizations that will free you from samsara, that will remove all of the levels of afflictive obscurations, as well as the knowledge obscurations that you need to eventually become a Buddha. That is taught in what's called the Abhidharma basket, the basket of higher knowledge. So essentially, when you take everything the Buddha taught, it can be condensed into 3 baskets of learning. Those pertaining to our ethical behavior, the Vinaya, to concentration, which are the Sutra basket, and then those pertaining to developing wisdom, which is the Abhidharma basket. So you could say everything the Buddha taught is the 3 trainings. That's how we train our minds. That is what the path is. Now there are other ways that the path is divided. In the those focusing on the individual vehicle, there's often a reference to the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path, which I won't go into in detail today, but essentially these are the trainings that support generating those 3 higher trainings. They are all the practices that are involved in cultivating them. So again, I won't be going there and talking about that, but I have done a little course here at TNL. I'm sure it's out on the YouTube. That's on the these Eightfold Noble Path. 8 Steps to a Happy Life, I think is what I called it. So know that these are a really important teaching for those engaging in the Hinayana path, but they are also the foundation of everything the Buddha taught in the Mahayana. Because we could say the 3 baskets include everything in the Mahayana as well, because they do. So then Tsongkhapa goes on to say, okay, so we've introduced, and you need to engage in these 3 higher trainings. Tsongkhapa says, well, if this text, if this commentary that Tsongkhapa's put together on Atisha's text, if this were an independent commentary on the path of persons of medium capacity, meaning this section we're in the Lamrim, an extensive commentary on all 3 trainings would be necessary here. However, since this is not the case, the training in wisdom, special insight, and the training of the mind for generating shamatha, the training in concentration, will be explained in the context of persons of great capacity. Again, in Course 4 is where we'll look at part 4 of this. We'll look at those 2 in really great detail, right? Therefore, here, in this section, I will only briefly state the way to train in ethics. We've already touched a lot on ethics through studying karma, but he needs to, again, reiterate some points around ethical behavior and its importance. So, in this regard, he says, initially contemplate the benefits of ethics again and again, and increase your heartfelt enthusiasm for it. And we might think that maybe our ethics don't matter, that somehow we've got some higher, we want to generate deeper concentration and deeper wisdom. Well, you cannot do those things without ethics. You need the foundational practices of ethics in order to go anywhere on the path. Again, back to Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, which is quoted extensively in this section. It is said, the rules are the basis, the ground of all excellent qualities. Just like the earth is the basis for the animate and the inanimate. All the rocks and mountains and everything that are inanimate, all the creatures, ourselves, worms and cows and whatever, all of these beings, are supported on the earth. Therefore, ethics are just like this. Everything else, it's the ground for all of our other excellent qualities. And in the questions of Subahu Tantra, it is said, just as crops grow faultlessly, depending on the soil, the most superior virtuous phenomena grow depending on someone's ethics, moistened by the water of compassion. So again, it all starts with the ground of ethics. If you don't have good ethics, don't have good behavior, how can you possibly expect to settle the mind into concentration and deepen the mind into some penetrative wisdom when your mind is disturbed by your own, gross behavior of body, speech, and mind, right? Contemplate this according to these statements. So then he goes on to say, just as guarding the ethics you have undertaken brings enormous benefits, likewise there are great faults to not guarding them. You should contemplate the faults of not guarding them again and again, as taught in the scriptures. So again, look at the benefits of continuing to have good behavior and staying true to that and being very meticulous and not engaging in any misbehavior. But look at the faults when you do engage in them. The rebirths that you take, the conditions that you'll have that will not be ideal, and so on. The Sutra on Cherishing Monks says, ethics are happiness for certain people, ethics are suffering for others. They are happiness for those who have them, and they're suffering for those who breach them, So essentially, ethics can be a foundation of your ruin, and they can be a foundation of your great progress, depending upon whether you abide by them or not. The root Tantra of Manjushri says, if ethics decline in those who recite, there will be no highest attainments. By recite, he means, I think, those who even engage in tantric recitation, mantra, and what have you. Nor will there be middling attainments. Even the least attainments will remain absent. You can't get much going, no real ground or support, if you don't have good ethical behavior. The king of sages did not teach mantra attainments for those of loose ethics, nor is that the place or direction to go to the city of nirvana. So whether you want to achieve Buddhahood through the tantric teachings, the Vajrayana, or whether you want to even just attain your own liberation and attain nirvana, you will not get there without ethics. How could there be in such bad children any attainments of mantra at all? How could there be fortunate rebirths for those beings who disregard ethics? Forget about the more ultimate results, even just getting a good rebirth. If you're not engaging in good behavior, as we saw in that section of the Lamrim, you're not even going to get a good rebirth. You're going to end up in one of the 3 lower states of existence. And having, again, even when you're in human existences, having non-ideal conditions. If they do not take higher rebirths, nor partake of highest bliss, what need mention their accomplishing the mantras that the victor taught? All right, so any progress we make, anything we're going to accomplish is based on those good behavior, having good ethics. Then this wonderful quote from the King of Concentration Sutra, which says, the trainings that I have taught to those who wear the laity's gray apparel, even monks who are fully ordained will not have those trainings then. It's kind of saying that essentially, if we have this very foundational level of ethics that is needed, which are the 5 lay vows, these 5 taken by those in the laity. It says their laity's gray apparel, I guess, meaning, in a non-ordained apparel. If even monks who are fully ordained, if they don't have those trainings, well, then there's nothing they're going to accomplish, even though they might be holding these other so-called vows that they took with ordination. So as it says there, according to this statement, striving in the trainings is special and has more effect at this time, when it is said that even fully ordained monks do not completely guard the 5 basic trainings taught to lay vow holders. Therefore, you should make effort in this. I mean, we are said to be in a time where there is great degeneration, but this is not just like this century or something, or anything that specific. It's this entire period of human kind of history where we're dealing with a degeneration of a lot of things. And even when you look at the duration of the Buddha's teachings in the Abhidharma teachings that we studied in Italy, it says that every 500 years there's a further degeneration. Well, we're halfway through the 5,000 years that the Buddha's teachings are said to remain in this world. We're 2,500 years into that degeneration of the teachings. And even when you get to the end, there will be people holding so-called ordination, wearing the robes and what have you, but they won't even be holding the ethical behavior that those robes represent. So even now we are dealing with some degeneration of morality in our world. And of course, that's due to the preponderance of delusion, afflictions in our world. It's very hard to practice, but because it is so very hard to practice, your power of holding the vows at this time becomes even greater. So any vows you take, hold them purely, and the power of that, the merit of those, and the kind of foundational basis they provide is much, much stronger, because you are doing that in the face of opposing things that are everywhere. It's very hard to practice the Buddha's teachings in this day and age. So the same sutra at the bottom of the screen there says, this is the King of Concentration Sutra, it's saying what I just said, at the time when the Dharma decays and the Sugata's teachings are coming to an end, the merit of those who practice a single training, just one day and night, even if you were to hold just one vow for a day and a night, there are what are called the 24-hour vows, the day-long vows that you take in the Mahayana, as well as even those in the part of the Pratimoksha. Even if you hold just one of those vows for just one day and night, that merit will extraordinarily exceed the one who for millions of eons, as many as there are sand grains in the river Ganges, and with a clear mind honors billions of trillions of Buddhas with food, drink, parasols, banners, and garlands of light. Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to love to quote this verse. I heard him do that many, many times because he really wanted to emphasize the power of vows. So again, the emphasis here in this section is on the Pratimoksha vows, but then we have the Bodhisattva vows, the Tantric vows, and as I said, even 24-hour vows that in the Mahayana tradition are taught as the 8 Mahayana precepts. Those are very powerful ways to engage in even just a short period of time holding vows purely. And every day when we do our kind of purification at the end of the day, we should rejoice in the vows that we have held. And another day of kind of reaffirming ourselves for carrying those vows forward with pure conduct. They are a very powerful way to generate merit. I think I mentioned this before in this class, but maybe not. When you take a vow, I did when we were talking about the support, right, in karma. If you have the support of someone who's taken vows, they are generating even greater merit around the clock, even when they're not tempted to kill a being or to lie or steal or whatever the case might be. Again, that is the power of vows. They produce this unending flow of merit just by virtue of holding them purely in your continuum, having taken them. You do have to take them from a qualified master and so on. Bodhisattva vows, it appears you can take without the presence of such a master, but you need to really study them well, and we'll talk about that in part 3. Now we get into a mini little section here about what are called the 4 causes for infractions. The antidote to the first of these 4 causes, which is not knowing, which means you don't know what the vows are or what constitutes holding them or breaking them, the antidote, of course, is to study and know the trainings. That's why what I just said, if you're going to take any of these levels of vows, of course, tantric vows, you are advised not to study ahead of time. It's best to take them with some confidence that you'll be able to hold them after receiving them. But for the Bodhisattva vows, and certainly for the Pratimoksha vows, it's good to study them. Know the trainings. Know what is entailed in holding them purely. Then, you will hold them and not have any infractions. But even after you've taken them, like for the Tantric vows, then you need to study them immediately. Get to know what is involved in holding them. And that will be the cause for avoiding the infractions, because you'll know when you're transgressing. The second of the 4 causes for infractions is carelessness, heedlessness. The antidote to that is the mindfulness. First of all, there are 5 of these, 5 antidotes for this. The first is the mindfulness that does not forget the objects and aspects of what to adopt and what to discard with regard to that training. In this case, pratimoksha vows, but it could be, again, bodhisattva vows, tantric vows. The vigilance, which is kind of your introspective mind that is observing everything that is going on, that individually analyzes the 3 doors, body, speech, and mind, at every moment, and brings to mind the good or faulty actions you engage in. Again, both of these, mindfulness and vigilance, are talked about extensively in Shantideva's texts, wonderful teachings there about how we need those 2 forces. Mindfulness is like the rope, and the kind of vigilance is sort of the goad that kind of keeps the mind in its place, keeps it on in a virtuous state, avoiding the non-virtues and so on, breaking vows, what have you. The third factor is called here shame. Shame, I prefer the term self-respect. It's the mind that shuns faults from the perspective of oneself or the Dharma. And then the next one, the 4th one, is called embarrassment. I would prefer the term consideration for others, that shuns faults, thinking that others will criticize you. Finally, the 5th antidote to carelessness is the intimidation that fears the fully ripened effects of faulty conduct. You have to have some kind of conscientiousness or something that keeps you from engaging in those, because you are aware that there are ramifications if you have faulty conduct. So again, this will keep you from being careless. It'll make you pay attention to what you're doing. Train in these and others. I might mention that some of those are on that list of 51 mental factors, particularly shame and embarrassment, which, again, I don't prefer those terms. The terms I prefer are self-respect. You're doing something out of respect for yourself and your upholding of the Dharma, so you don't want to go against your own sort of inner guide, your own conscience. And then the other one, embarrassment, where you want to have consideration for others. Think about how your misbehavior reflects on others, or how they will be upset at what you might do in transgressing that behavior. The third of these causes of, what was the phrase exactly? It was causes of infractions, this kind of what you would have an infraction of your vow. The third is a lack of respect. So as an antidote to that, be respectful toward the teacher, meaning the Buddha, because it's capitalized there, referring to the Buddha, his formulated rules, and those whose conduct accords with purity. So we might think, we just kind of lose our respect for these trainings and what have you. You need to have that as kind of another force to keep you from having infractions, is that you really respect what the Buddha has taught, the rules he's given, others who accord with that. As an antidote to many mental afflictions, which is one of the problems that we all have, right? We have lots of mental afflictions that can cause us to engage in infractions through the power of our attachment or anger or what have you. You should examine your mind stream and try to apply the antidote to whatever mental affliction predominates. I've just got a footnote there that I want to remind you. I mentioned this previously when we talked about the afflictions, that there is a section of Geshe Sopa's text in Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, where he talks about the antidotes to the delusions. It's over the course of about 35 pages, and it's well worth looking at. I also gave you that meditation on the main afflictions, the root afflictions, and kind of combating them with various antidotes. But know that that is our job, as I mentioned when we talked about it then. So those are the 4. Again, the 4 causes of infractions and the 4 antidotes. And that is on your homework for tonight. If you do not put effort into this and commit even a minor transgression and then think, oh, it's a small mistake, this engagement in carelessness with respect to the formulated rules will only cause you to suffer. Because as exegesis of the discipline says, those who are unconcerned with regard to the teachings of the compassionate teacher and slightly transgress them will from that come under the power of suffering, like mango groves that are spoiled through cutting bamboo. The idea behind this is that if you have a bamboo fence around a mangrove grove that's supposed to kind of protect that from being people stealing from it or animals getting into it or what have you. If you cut away the bamboo fence, you get rid of your boundaries, your barriers, well then the whole thing goes to waste, right? Because there's no longer anything there to protect it. And then it goes on to say, though some can transgress the royal decrees of the king, and if it's infrequent, not get punished at all, if they transgress the Buddha's words improperly, they will migrate to the beasts like the Naga Elapatra. This Naga Elapatra, there's a little story about him. You can read it in the commentaries that I've cited for the text, for studying this text. But Elapatra was essentially born as a Naga with a tree growing out of its head, really bizarre form, because when he was a monk in a prior life, he broke the vow that monastics have to not cut down trees, to not engage in that type of harm to nature and what have you. And so by that transgression, it manifested in this strange rebirth as a Naga, this sort of serpent-like being with a tree growing out of his head. It's just using examples like this, and this was a being that appeared in the time of the Buddha, and the Buddha made that comment, because they all wondered, well, how did he end up like that? And the Buddha, through his omniscient mind, explained that. Therefore, put effort into not being stained by faults and infractions. If you are nevertheless stained by them, do not leave it at that indifferently. Don't think, it doesn't matter. So I broke my bodhisattva vows or my pratimoksha vows. But put effort into undoing the downfall or bad action as has been taught. Again, we have to undo it through the four opponent powers, purifying and so on. And of course, in the monastics, they have what's called sojong, which is a confession of downfalls they do together. And there are practices in the Mahayana that are taught, additionally for various breaking of vows and what have you. And then you need to restore your vows. If this method of guarding morality is for those who hold the pratimoksha vows, it is also similar in the case of mantra, the tantric vows, because the questions of Subahu Tantra states, among all pure ethics from the pratimoksha and the Vinaya that I, the victor, taught, lay people practicing mantra should abandon the signs and rituals and practice the rest. We don't have the signs and rituals of a monastic, but we practice everything else. The vows hold equally in regard to lay people, especially those practicing Tantra. Lay practitioners of mantra should behave as set forth in the Vinaya, except for the trappings of ordination and some parts of the ritual actions. So what need is there to mention ordained practitioners of mantra? If you're an ordained practitioner of mantra, a monk or a nun who has tantric vows and so on, well then you have to abide by all of your sets of vows. Kamlungpa also said, when a famine breaks out, everything depends on barley. Likewise, everything hinges on ethics. Therefore, earnestly apply yourself to it. I guess in Tibet, barley was the big staple item. So, if every famine breaks out, well, you've got to have that basic grain that you rely upon for all of your food and sustenance, So ethics is your sustenance in that way. Pure ethics, he says, also do not come about in someone who has not reflected on actions and their effects. Therefore, it is an essential instruction to reflect on them. That's why, again, there's a lot of emphasis, and we spent a number of classes looking at karma because it is so important to have an understanding of that if we're ever to have the foundational practices necessary. Sharawa also said, generally, whatever happens, good or bad, depends on the Dharma. Within that, if you rely on what is suggested in the Vinaya, you need not change anything. You will become sincere, withstand investigation, enjoy practice, and have a good end. All benefits will be reaped by having a good foundation in ethics. In the Vinaya in particular, as it's set out for those full details on the monastic vows are an important part of practice for those who make that decision in this life to be an ordained practitioner. Then Geshe Domtompa. Geshe Domtompa again was the heart disciple of Lama Tisha. He was the Tibetan who Lama Tisha became closest to and disseminated many teachings to. He said, many people rely on the Vinaya and reject mantra, or rely on mantra and reject the Vinaya, kind of thinking it's one or the other. Either I have to be an ordained person and follow the Vinaya purely, or I abandon the Vinaya and become a mantric practitioner, tantric practitioner purely. Only in my guru's tradition, which of course is Lama Atisha, does the Vinaya become the companion of mantra, and mantra the companion of the Vinaya. The two are like, bread and butter or whatever. They go together. You don't practice one without the other. They are equally supportive. And that's why, once more, we saw that quote earlier from Tsongkhapa's Foundation of All Good Qualities, it is the root of the teaching. The pratimoksha vows, the Vinaya, is so important. Again, a lot of the emphasis is paid here in the context of monks or nuns who are studying this text. But even the Vinaya that we are able to practice, the 5 lay vows, those of us who aren't ordained, there's great benefit to holding those purely. Then Lama Atisha, Geshe Dongtongpa's master, said, with us in India, whenever an important matter or unprecedented activity arose, those who upheld the scriptural baskets convened to determine whether it was repudiated by or in contradiction to the 3 scriptural baskets, again, the Vinaya, Sutra, and Abhidharma. And a decision was made based on that. We, from Vikramashila, which is where the monastery where Atisha studied, then had the task to examine whether it was rejected by or in contradiction to bodhisattva behavior. And the decision was upheld by the entire ordained community. So even when it came down to matters of kind of Mahayana practice and bodhisattva behavior, it's always meant to be in accord with the Vinaya as much as possible. Now, there will be instances where you do have permission, even in the bodhisattva vows, to go against the lower trainings in order to uphold something that is higher. And examples of this are like when His Holiness has talked about when you are in a situation where you might need to lie in order to protect the life of another being. And he used the example specifically of like a deer that you see in the woods come past you, and then you see hunters following him, the deer. They say, did you see that deer that just came through here? And you could lie by saying, no, I didn't see it, in order to protect the life of that deer. I don't want to get into a whole discussion of all the various other aspects of that, because obviously it's not that simple of a decision to lie to somebody. But if you have genuine compassion for the deer and for the hunters who are going to be engaging in killing that deer, why would you want them to do that, right? You wouldn't want to give them the information that would then help them to engage in a negative action, cause suffering for that being, and cause future suffering for themselves. So this is the logic behind it. And so essentially, when we have a greater foundation of practice, which is what we see in the Bodhisattva path, then there is an ability to transgress some of these lower practices. But in general, we uphold those. And that is kind of, again, the foundational practice. It's really rarely that we would need to transgress any of those lower trainings in order to uphold the bodhisattva vows, but we are called upon to do that when it is very clear that we have an opportunity to embrace those higher ideals. That concludes the explanation of training the mind in the stages of the path, common to persons of medium capacity. So I think I may have 1 or 2 things I didn't share with the slides. Since I've got maybe a couple minutes, I do want to open it up to questions, but let me see. This is about the bamboo fence. I don't know if I need to share it, but some farmers, Geshe Sopa says, plant a thick thorny hedge, like a fence, around their orchards to protect their trees. If that hedge is damaged or deteriorates, animals or thieves can get through and the orchard may suffer. And in the case, this was a mango grove that was protected by a bamboo fence. Although nothing has directly damaged the fruit, the orchard will become vulnerable, and eventually the fruit will be lost. This metaphor is applied to the Buddha's precepts, and especially to the minor rules, which were established to build a fence around the central practice of ethical conduct. So we need kind of, again, our barrier, our fence around, and don't let that decay in any way. Don't start thinking, oh, I can break a few minor rules. It doesn't really matter because, those are not so important. We want to try to uphold everything with equal importance. And that's all I had to share there. I might mention that in working with this section in particular, there is that set of meditations that Venerable Sangye Kadro put together. I've referred to it occasionally in this section, but maybe not as often as I should. Know that she first starts off with inserting 12 links of dependent arising, which again is not something that is taught in our text, but there are some nice little kind of quotes there about these various factors if you do make the decision to study that on your own. Again, I won't be teaching that. Then there's an identification of the path, which a lot of these verses that we had in our text are repeated here, about like practicing even if your hair catches on fire or what have you. Then in the next page, we have the benefit of guarding ethical discipline, and then the shortcomings of not guarding. You can use this in your meditation. Again, that's what it was intended for. She put together this whole guide. And then you do have this nice little chart that goes into these 4 causes of infractions. And of course, they're antidotes. So that's one little thing that you could use to work with. Maybe I need to start putting charts in my homework, but I've been just going for the straight written answers. But anyway. And then there's a little classification of Vinaya scriptures. This is also a quote that we saw that had to do with, again, the bamboo grove and Elapatra that we just looked at. I think that's everything for this. Yeah, those are the other documents that I went through earlier. I don't think I have anything else up. This is where on that chart with the mental factors you can see shame and embarrassment here, which again I prefer to call self-respect and consideration for others. They are 2 of the 11 virtuous mental factors. So again, I realize it's kind of small on the screen, but know that those are important ones for us. And when you study minds and mental factors, you'll get a chance to look at them in more detail. Any questions or comments from tonight? Anything anyone wants to share in the Zoom room or in the Gompa or ask about? So again, we have covered quite a bit in this second part. It's been a lot of teachings, very rich teachings. But one thing I'll just go ahead and mention, one of the things I put in terms of studying for the test that you might find useful. I mean, I know people have very busy schedules, and no doubt as we've gone through this text, you haven't maybe put as much time into meditating on these topics as what might be ideal. And that's okay. Don't beat yourself up. But one way to study for the test is to actually meditate on these topics. Like the death awareness meditation, that is one of the questions, right? So if you're able to sit in meditation and go through them, you find that your experience of them in meditation helps them to stick a little better, right? Than just trying to memorize them or read them or what have you. Ideally, we want to have all these things in our mind in that way so we can bring them to mind. There is a question from Alex. How can we structure a Lamrim retreat on our own? Well, it depends upon the length of time you want to spend in retreat. There are outlines that, maybe I'll find this one that Rinpoche had put together that he had advised for how people could structure a Lamrim retreat that's only a couple of days of length, 2 or 3 days or something, where you would have a very dedicated retreat time where you're engaging in a number of sessions each day and going through all the various topics of the Lamrim. But again, it's hard. It depends upon, of course, one thing is you do have to have some location that's going to provide some sort of, ideal is a weird word, but at least something that is a good environment to support some level of practice. It's very hard to do that in one's own home, particularly if you share your home with other people, because it's hard to have that level of kind of isolation away from things to be able to go deeper into the practice. This is why you're generally encouraged to, do retreat at other locations where there are retreat centers or there's maybe a retreat cabin. But other things can act in that way. Like I do retreat sometimes house sitting for people that I know in New Mexico, and when they're away on vacation, then I pack up everything and move in, and I do retreat in their home. So I'm not around my home and my stuff, but I bring what I need to study and practice and meditate and what have you. Know that for those who are brand new to doing retreat, it's often good to do a group retreat first so that you get some kind of idea of having someone else guide or lead you through engaging in these teachings. And I wish that we were all like at one location and engaging in this. That's where the basic program, and this text in particular, are taught in some places in the world where people are residential. They stay there, they study there, and they do practice together, and they do retreats together. That's an ideal place to start, because then you gain some discipline around what it's like to engage in a retreat with someone else leading it, somebody setting the schedule out, and you have to kind of come to every session and be a part of that. Doing it on your own is a little tougher right from the get-go, but you still can do that, and again, of shorter duration. Remember that the requirement for people engaging in the basic program for certification is to do, I think for the online program, it's 1 month of Lamrim retreat. For the in-person one, it's 3 months of Lamrim retreat. So it's hard to have that duration of time to engage in dedicated practice, but you can start wherever you can, with even just a weekend of time, or a week if you can do it, and then eventually a month. And remember, you can do, for those 3 months, you can do them 1 month at a time. That is possible to do that. My initial hope, and I haven't talked to Venerable Dundrup here, was maybe it would even have to be some other location, because we don't really have a retreat center in Santa Fe that is ideal for doing this, I don't think. I haven't really found one that would be ideal, is to lead a group retreat on the Lamrim at some point. I'd be happy to do that. We just have to find the circumstances coming together to accomplish that. And it would be wonderful to do a month, though 3 months would be outrageous, but even just to do a month together in some location. The problem is, again, we have people even from all over the world coming to this class through the miracle of the internet and Zoom. So it's kind of, not going to be something that everybody's going to be able to participate in due to restrictions of time, money, what have you. But maybe we can still look at doing something like that. And I would love to do that at the end of this, maybe sometime next year when we finish this entire course. But just know that, again, on your own, it is possible, and I will find that, and I'll put it in the meditations folder. So if we go back to, I think there's some additional comments or questions in the Zoom room, but let's go back to, where did I put that? That was the other browser that I had open. I think this is it. Yes. Okay, so if we go back to the drive where I have everything, I have meditations and retreat. So again, there are the retreat meditations that Venerable Sangye Khadra put together. I will add to this the outline of a kind of a structure for a couple of day course. I'll see what else I can find. Maybe there's some additional information out there about structuring a Lamrim retreat that you could adapt to your individual situation. Anyway, that gives you some guidance on doing that. Let's look at the chat box and see what else is here. Somebody found it. Is this PTP presenting the path? Is that what that is? Lamrim retreat? Venerable Dundrup put that in there. Thank you, Venerable Dundrup. There it is, yeah. This is, I think, for presenting the path, which is the third module of discovering Buddhism. It is something that you can find there. So I'll make sure that that and any other advice I can find on doing Lamrim retreat is out there. From Alex again too, for the requirement for the Lamrim retreat, should we wait until the end of BP or can we start any time? I have to look at that because I think that you're advised to not start that until you've completed the Lamrim course. I think that's the instruction that is out there. Maybe Venerable Dundrup can confirm that. So it's not to say that you shouldn't do any retreat before then, but to do like a longer duration of time that's going to count for the requirement, I think it is best to wait until you've gone through the entire Lamrim, because over the course of this month, you want to do the entire Lamrim. You want to cover all the topics within it. And while you may have studied the Lamrim elsewhere, it's really ideal if you've gone through at least the text here in this course that presents it. But let me confirm that, and when I come back with all of you, when we start part 3, I'll confirm how to some of these things around meditation retreat. But I'm pretty sure that that's the advice, or the, maybe not even advice, the requirement that is there. Any other questions around anything we covered tonight or anything else on this part 2? Again, even those of you who are not doing it for certification, feel free to do the test if you'd like to just engage in that type of study and meditation. It's really useful to know these topics. I mean, it's certainly fine, I suppose, to have kind of a piece of paper or text in front of you and look down at it constantly while you're doing your meditation, but it's really ideal to have that information within you. Where you can sit down and go, okay, I'm going to do a death awareness meditation. Maybe when you get on a plane, right? And you get on an airplane and you know that that plane has some chance of crashing, though we don't know when death will happen to any of us, as we saw. But maybe you do your death awareness meditation while the plane's getting ready to take off. Well, then you already have the points there. You don't have to have a text with you. You don't have to have anything. You already know how to meditate on that, how to kind of put your mind in that space. So again, and it's really important with all of these teachings that we have a way to easily integrate them into our minds. We've gone about 5 minutes over. Let me show on the screen. There was maybe one other comment. When will part 3 start? Part 3 starts on September 12th. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention in regard to the test is I'm giving you more time because there are a little bit more to study, and also we're starting this next course already in 3 weeks, so I don't know, it might not give a lot of time for people to do the test before then. I didn't want to set a deadline right with the beginning of the next part, so I put it 2 more weeks out or something. I think you've got like 5 weeks, it's maybe 6 weeks, end of September. Let me pull up my own document on this and take a look at it, because I know that I did extend the deadline for it. That's actually in the other document, right? That's the one that has the what you sign in terms of the honor statement, which you can read ahead of time. Let me pull that up. Sorry, kind of meandering around here on my screen trying to figure out where all this stuff is. Okay, there we go. All right, so when we go back to test materials and we look at the honor statement, it indicates there, I might have to make it a little bit bigger, that you have until September 29th. From August 20th, which is tomorrow. I don't think any of you are ready to take the exam tomorrow or the test tomorrow, but you have until September 29th. But again, part 3 will begin on September 12th. Is that right? Maybe that's not the right day. Yeah, and the 29th. That's 29th is a Tuesday. So the 12th is a Wednesday. And again, I will have everything posted for that, and you can, register through TNL for that to have access to the materials. I'll have that out there hopefully later this week. I'm working still on the outline and putting all the page numbers of the various texts and all that kind of stuff, but it's a lot of work that we came up with, getting the test ready and getting that ready, and I just haven't had time to do all of it. So these are the questions for tonight for discussion. Those of you who are able to stay for that first one has to do with renunciation, that section of what is the measure of developing it, how Tsongkhapa explains it, why is it important for one who wishes to become a Mahayanist. Then the 3 types of precious trainings, and which of these does Lama Tsongkhapa address at this point in his text, and why is that so? Felt that was all that was necessary on that. And then regarding the manner of engaging in the first of the 3 types of precious trainings, what are the 4 causes for infractions and their respective antidotes? So you're welcome to discuss any or all of those as you have time. All right, let's take just like 2 minutes or so, and then we'll be back here until 5 minutes before when we do our reconvening at the end. Those of you who have to leave, please be sure to dedicate and seal the merits with emptiness, and I'll see the rest of you soon. So I just want to remind people that I had the wrong date. I said that in the chat room, but the wrong date for starting the course. It's that same week of the 12th, but the 12th is like a Saturday or Sunday. It's September 9th. It'll be a Wednesday, September 9th, that this 3rd part starts. Were there any questions or comments from tonight yet, from the discussion in the Zoom room or in the chat room? Or no? Okay, then let's go ahead and do our closing for tonight. Thank you, Venerable Dundrup, for arranging the chat room. It just is a little bit easier to maneuver that with everything here. Otherwise, I was getting my voice over the speakers and all of this. It was a little crazy. Let me put up on the screen the usual dedication prayers that we do, as well as we'll do the sealing the merits and emptiness. Whoop, that's not what I wanted to put up. Sorry. Clicked on the wrong thing here. I think it's this. Yeah. Okay, so prayers for teachings, and let's go down to the dedication prayers. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And then thinking about His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all of our other precious teachers, and how much we need these spiritual guides in this world and in our lives in particular. But for the benefit of all beings, we want these guides to have good health, long lives, and for all their holy wishes to be fulfilled. So we'll say the prayer for His Holiness, but think about all the other gurus that are with us, trying to create the causes for them as well, to have good health, long life, and so on. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then for our spiritual director, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for his swift identification of his reincarnation and everything to be auspicious for that being to be of incredible benefit. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings you suddenly departed to peace, what a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Let me share on the screen the sealing the merits in emptiness, and do this as a slideshow so it's a little bit larger on the screen. Due to all the past, present, and future merits collected by me, and all the merits of the 3 times collected by numberless Buddhas and numberless sentient beings, which are completely empty of existing from their own side, may I, who am completely empty of existing from my own side, achieve the state of full enlightenment, which is completely empty of existing from its own side, and lead all sentient beings who are completely empty of existing from their own side to that state which is completely empty of existing from its own side, by myself alone, who is completely empty of existing from my own side. So again, just meditate on emptiness for just a short while, this lack of inherent existence of all these factors. They lack that, are empty of that, and yet they still function, they still exist in mere name, mere designation. Okay. Thank you all for joining tonight and throughout this course. And I'll look forward to seeing you all again on September 9th, right date this time. I think I had the 12th because I was thinking about this month, and today was 19th. I don't know, somehow I got confused on that. But anyway, so, and again, those of you doing the test, please feel free to contact me if you have any questions as you go about your study and what have you. So be well, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you all.